afternoon, Gold Room. How you doing? Folks, we are nearly halfway through day one of the first 2 days of this conference. You should be doing better. So I ask you again, how's everybody doing? I'm not gonna save the world all grumpy sitting on your hands. All right, folks. Well, look, we're going to dive right in. It is late in the day, so it would be understandable if your energy level is waning. But I have great news for you. It is going to pick right up. This room is the Gold Room. It is called that for a reason. This is going to be the gold standard of conversation. Is what's about to happen on this stage. In this stage, we are going to have a great conversation about policy actions that are going to take us forward in the circular economy. And if you're just coming in, first of all, you're late. But second of all, just grab a seat, do so as innocuously and inconspicuously as possible, and I will only make fun of you a little bit because you're late. Actually, I'm going to pass off the baton to someone else, but Justin, it's going to be your duty to make fun of these people when they keep coming in late, because it's killing me. You're killing me. No, I'm fine. I'm really fine with it. It's late in the day for all of us. Look, I've got great news because I'm going to pass things over to the moderator of this session. He is Jos Berriot, the Executive Lead Policy and Institutions for the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Now, Jos has been with the foundation since its creation back in 2010, after 15 years spent in the media and publishing industry. Now he leads the organization's institutional engagement and the work with national governments across the foundation's offices in Europe, Latin America, China, and North America. He manages the relationship with supranational bodies such as the European Commission, United Nations, G7/20 Resource Alliance, OECD, and the World Economic Forum. Friends of the planet, both prompt and late. Please welcome to the stage, Jos Berriot.
Thank you, Pep. Thanks, Pep. I just hope you have the names of the ones who are late so we can punish them accordingly.
Oh, I've got it.
And yes, it's late, and some people call that the graveyard shift. I just tend to think that you're a better informed version of the people you were this morning, so all good for us. First of all, I'm delighted to be hosting this session and of the plenary day one. I would like to thank Sitra, of course, the Belgian Presidency of the Council of the European Union, and DG Environment for hosting us. The Foundation has been a partner of the World Circular Economy Forum since the first edition in 2017, so it's even a greater pleasure for me to be here. And circular economy, we've heard a lot about it today. Progress has been made. As usual, it's never enough, never fast enough. And as Janusz Potocznik was saying this morning, presenting the Global Resources Outlook, we still have a way to go when it comes to really addressing the material impact of our economy. And actually, Janusz has been quite modest in his introduction because he could have reminded people that he was the one who set up the European Resource Efficiency Platform in 2012, out of which the first circular economy package was born. And we also need, beyond the material dimension of the circular economy, to make a better link with the positive impacts that it can generate in terms of nature and ecosystems. And that's something that I'll come back to when I talk briefly about a new study that the Foundation is launching in draft format today called Building Prosperity, featuring analytics by our partners at Systemic. Stepping back and looking at the bigger picture, on a very positive note, we see circular economy has been embedded in policy in the EU, but also increasingly globally. And one of the best examples that we have at the moment is Brazil, preparing to launch its circular economy strategy and putting that at the center of its G20 presidency. We also know that we're moving to a new phase, potentially in the EU, moving to implementation. Some people refer to it as the end of the tidal wave of legislation, so we're moving to the how now. And so after a solid decade of legislation, it feels like Europe is more focused on action, including at global level. And it really is crucial to move to that how question, but it also makes it a bit more difficult and tricky. We need the mechanisms, and we also need to bring everyone on board. The rise of the global south in the conversation on circular economy is also very good news. But that means that we need even better mechanisms to harmonize, to think about how we can really make sure that those impacts are positive, and when they're negative, they're more distributed and in a more fair way. So to conclude, and before I hand over to Minister Khattabi, it's important to move circular economy beyond its technicality, beyond its status of a pure materials management strategy, in order to get from a model that depletes finite resources to one that builds social, natural, and economic capital. And on that note, I would like to hand over to Minister Khattabi, who has a big portfolio of the environment, climate, sustainable development, and the Green Deal for the Belgian government. Minister Khattabi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it is really my pleasure to welcome you in our beautiful capital, Brussels, even if it's under our national reign. I hope you appreciate it. It's a long time ago that I didn't even see such rain. And it's also my pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you the importance the Belgian presidency attaches to circular economy nationally, but also at European and global level. As a small, densely populated and resource-scarce country with a rich industrial backbone, Belgium has a long-standing interest in circular economy and sustainable material management. Back in 2010, during the previous Belgian EU presidency, we already proposed a set of Council conclusions to put this theme high on the European agenda. That kicked off a period where a range of European initiatives on resource efficiency and circular economy saw the light. The 2 EU action plans on circular economy played a significant role in putting the EU rightfully on the map as a global circular front runner. However, let's do the math. Worldwide, we are confronted with the astounding impacts of a planetary, interconnected crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution, combined with the food crisis, poverty and wars. And at the same time, global material use has tripled over the last 50 years and continues to grow. Reports of leading scientific institutions, such as IPCC, IPBES, and recently, the IRP's Global Resources Outlook, make it very clear. The current levels of resource consumption are a key driver for climate change and environmental pressures, as well as for social inequalities. We cannot tackle this environmental and social crisis without tackling the levels of our material consumption. And a full-scale and comprehensive circular economy is an essential tool here. With this knowledge in mind, and at the brink of a new European legislative cycle, the Belgian presidency wants to initiate reflections on the next steps to scale up and accelerate the circular transition. Under the European Green Deal, several initiatives have been taken that will contribute substantially to a climate-neutral and circular path for the EU. Time will allow us to assess the results of these significant efforts. Nevertheless, the choices we make for the direction of a circular economy are not value-free. Some questions remain, and they require us to widen our thinking. The first question is whether we are sufficiently equipped to establish a consistent resource policy, including on critical raw materials, in connection with other related policies and objectives. And I think, for instance, of the growing demand for resources for the energy transition and the potential environmental and social pressures this entails. Or the aim to strengthen industrial competitive sustainability and what place sustainable resource management obtains there. Or how European trade policies take into account the global impacts of resource use in terms of environmental pressures and social justice. How can we ensure policy coherence avoid trade-offs, and allow for real systemic change? What framework and which common policy principles help us to deal with those questions? Another question is on the instruments we have in place to significantly reduce the environmental pressure of our resource consumption. How can we make the shift from circular products and materials as a goal in itself to an approach where circular economy is an instrument for systemic change towards the materialization and the reduction of environmental pressures from resource use? Thirdly, how can we make sure that making the shift to more sustainable and circular production and consumption model is just, and that we leave no one and no place behind? What is the role for the social economy and its employment? And last but not least, in the context of this plenary, we strive for circular solutions at a global level, since currently material flows and environmental pressures associated with them are global. With the criticality of some resources in mind, we can wonder if we shouldn't strive for a pan-European, thorough and comprehensive circular economy rather than a global one? What role can the EU still play to strengthen cooperation on other continents, not only bilaterally, but also within multilateral institutions, governance, and agreements? Some of these questions are raised and discussed in the Environmental Council during our presidency, and we hope to bring a strong message from the Member State to the next European Commission and the next Parliament. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister Katabi. Can I invite you to take a seat, unless you were planning on running away?
Okay.
Which would be bad news, actually, because we do need to advance on those topics, definitely. Let me invite the panel to the stage, please, and I'll start by Hans Bruynings, representing the International Resource Panel, and Hans is the lead author of the Global Resources Outlook, which I believe has got a bit of exposure today, hasn't it? Please take a seat. Next up, please, can I call Martin Sekel, who's the Deputy Director-General for DG International Partnership of the European Commission. Finally, Veerle Slenders, who is with the recycling and materials management company Umicore, and who's the Executive Vice President for Recycling. Thank you very much for joining us. I think we've heard quite a lot already. Thank you, Minister, for words such as competitiveness, trade. It really is about putting the circular economy back firmly on the economic map and making sure as well that we make a strong economic case for it, because it would be perhaps naive to ignore the fact that there are certain political headwinds at the moment, and the support for the Green Deal may not be as strong as it was due to geopolitical shocks and other various factors that we can't really dive into right now. But it is important to carry it through and to also see the heritage of the legislative framework that has been put in place. The fact that the Eco-Design Directive has been adopted in December, giving a framework really for circular products in the European market and abroad. And going back perhaps to the Global Resources Outlook that we've discussed, one thing that really struck me when I read it was that notion that actually you do not, and I'll go to the slide directly because Hans, you'll talk about this more eloquently than I can, but surely the big message is that you don't have to choose between economic growth and development or stronger environmental protection. And the recommendations in the report show a pathway towards that. There's a sustainable scenario. I'll let you elaborate on this. So yes, the path is narrower perhaps and steeper, but if the policies and the shifts which are outlined in the report are implemented by 2060, we could see growth in material use fall by 30%, and at the same time, greenhouse gas emission could be reduced by more than 80%. The work that the IRP has done has shown that the built environment and mobility systems are the two main culprits when it comes to material impact. And this is something which is really critical when we look at the rate of circularity in Europe, which, as shown by the European Environmental Agency, of which, Hans, you've been the executive director until very recently. So you probably have a say in those slides as well, some of your numbers, I believe. These show that there is a stagnation in the rate of circularity, which are due to various, again, factors that are sometimes external, sometimes internal, but that point to definitely an increased need in action when it comes to circularity. Now, what that is not showing, because that stays in the material side of the picture, is that there is also a clear economic benefit in moving to circularity. And because of the work of the IRP and the work that has been done to showcase the importance of the built environment and the construction sector in those material impacts, we chose to leverage those insights at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, together with our partner Systemic, and to look at what could actually be done in terms of integrating nature-positive solutions in the built environment. And the result is as follows. We have modeled the economic benefits that were brought about by revitalizing land and assets, maximizing nature in cities, and optimizing design and material sourcing in the built environment. And the built environment sector in Europe is absolutely critical because it employs roughly 25 million people and contributes just shy of 10% of European GDP. What we can do with those strategies, and I won't go into the details of the report now, we have an accelerator session on Wednesday at 3:30 with the whole team that can go into all the details that you want, and that will be streamed online as well. But one figure that struck me is that we can, through those strategies as well, it's not only about the economic benefit, which, by the way, is considerable with 576 billion that goes directly to this construction sector and its supporting industries in terms of value pool. But it's also the wider benefits, the environmental benefits. 16,000 square kilometers of green spaces either created or protected, and by protected we mean protected from urban sprawl, so preserved. And that figure may be a bit difficult to grasp, but it's actually half of the size of Belgium, which is quite considerable again. 5% of total EU emissions could be mitigated through those strategies, which could lead also to a reduction of average urban temperature between 1% and 3%, depending on the location. And we know that European cities are particularly vulnerable to heat, urban island heat effects. So with all of that and showing that pathway for competitiveness, more resilience, Hans, can I perhaps ask you to give us a few reflections, first of all, on the global resources outlook and the work that we're starting to do together on this?
Yes, thanks, Jos, and thanks for inviting me here. Let me take you to the dream. Yeah, Martin Luther King changed the US by saying, "I have a dream," not "I have a nightmare." Huh? And the dream he had required fighting the system. Yeah? And I think if you go to the global resource outlook and you look at the sustainability transition scenario in that, which has been presented by Janez Potočnik, the co-chair, it is obvious that we will not just get there, but it is possible. Yeah? So let's assume that is a dream. We're in 2060. We look back on the previous 3.5 decades, and what has happened in between? Well, the GRO was clear. We were dealing with structural systemic problems, not in the fringes of our system. They could not be repaired by optimizing inherently unsustainable systems of production and consumption. You do not fix inherently unsustainable systems by prolonging their lifetime through optimization. So we were very clear, we need fundamentally different systemic approaches. We focused on the key systems. We made the link to the climate agenda, we made the link to the biodiversity agenda, but more importantly, to the teleology of any economy, and that should be to deliver human dignity, good living conditions for 10 billion people on this planet. Yeah? So we focused on that, and we focused on the boundary conditions, which is planetary boundaries. And in 2024, when the report was presented at the World Circular Economy Forum, we actually heard quite a few speeches along the following lines. Well, a lot is happening already. Look at how many countries are paying attention to circular economy. Look at the EU, which is leading and paving the road in many ways. Let's look at the financial system. The European Investment Bank, if I remember well, they announced 1 billion invested in circular economy, which of course we applauded and was great. But the deficit of Belgium in 2024 was 30 billion, just to put things in perspective, right? So we had all of these elements that said, oh, a lot is happening. I see so many good examples. Many of them will be presented here, yeah? Companies that do great work, scientists that do great work. But at the end of the day, we had to come to the conclusion that it was not happening at speed and at scale that was necessary to stay within planetary boundaries or to deliver human well-being on this planet. So we had to shift gears. We had to finally accept the direction of travel, creating human dignity and a good life for 10 billion people within planetary boundaries. That was the boundary condition, and we had to go to the essence of the economy. And that meant strong governance systems. That doesn't mean micromanagement and putting all sorts of crazy rules and procedures on everybody and their dog. It meant clear direction, clear sense of governance. That was the biggest innovation, more than technology maybe. The second thing was also very clear. The financial system had to be on board as a whole. Not a billion left, a billion right, but a 100 trillion global economy that we were shifting in direction in a fundamental way. Not additional stuff, but fundamentally addressing this big global economy. And the third critical thing we did was finally understand, especially in the global north, that we would not move to a regenerative economy that was circular and kept climate objectives within target, without fundamentally addressing inequality on this planet. There was no future without addressing that issue. And that meant that we had to introduce things like sufficiency in the report. Ooh, that was pushed back. Do you have a definition for that? Is there one clear document that tells us exactly what it is? No, but it was obvious at that time that this was a critical discussion to be had. What is justice? How do we address the logic of sufficiency in the global north to facilitate the necessary growth in the global south and to create not only a circular economy and within planetary boundaries, but also a world that provides us with the structural security and the structural ethical foundation that would lead us to where we are today in 2060. Yeah? And we're now 100 years after Martin Luther King's foundational speech, I have a dream, and I have to thank you for your commitment since 2024 to deliver on that dream. You were bold, you made the right choices, you understood that in the end, it was all about the structure and the incentives of the economy, guided by strong ethical and normative principles. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Hans. Minister Katabi, I wonder if what Hans just said gave you some sort of roadmap for the next 36 years of policy making. What you take away from it?
Well, first of all, I very much welcome this report as guiding report for future discussions. And as for me, as policymaker, a science-based approach is crucial. And more than ever, science is an antidote for simplism and populism. And so thank you for this hard work. And I will maybe mention 4 elements. First, and maybe the strongest one. The report shows clearly that resource use is the main driver for the triple crisis, planetary crisis, but also and you insist on it for social inequalities. And we cannot solve the problem without tackling in a serious and systemic way our resource consumption. And secondly, science shows that scenarios where we reduce overall resource consumption while growing a sustainable economy, improving well-being and reducing inequalities and environmental impacts are possible. But no one size fits all, and we need boldness, imagination and innovation. Thirdly, the report recommends target strategies with a focus on the most resource-intensive systems of mobility, housing, food and energy. And finally, sustainable resource management needs to be consistently institutionalized and integrated in multilateral environmental agreements and in trade agreements. And allow me to refer in this context also to my experience at UNEA 6. It was clear that different national visions, interests and realities on circular economy made this debate very complex. And it is definitely a global dialogue that needs further investment. Those are the 4 elements that I want
Thanks very
to
much,
highlight
Minister.
from the report.
I'd like to move from Europe to Europe with the international dimension now, and perhaps ask you, Martin, as part of the effort that the EU is doing on the global stage on circular economy, and I'll note that actually the 2020 Circular Economy Action Plan is very clear about that notion of talking to other countries and creating partnerships. So you're in charge of international partnerships. Can you elaborate a bit on the EU's external dimension and how it creates those partnerships? And secondly, in correlation to that question as well, how the European Union operates with the financial sector and private institutions as part of this international outreach.
Yes, thank you. First of all, as we've already heard, the key issue now going forward is to really put more effort and attention to implementation. And implementation has a very strong international dimension for many reasons. So this is one area which is a major priority for us. We work at 3 levels. First of all, at the national level, the country level, because this is where things need to happen. Just to give one key figure, in 2023 alone, more than 100 countries benefited from EU support to promote the circular transition of their economies. And we do this in many, many ways. We have, of course, technical and financial assistance. We engage in policy dialogues. We also foster and support external investments in these countries. That's the first level. Country-level action, however, can only happen, and it is greatly facilitated, if there is a strong global framework or frameworks. And that's the second area where we work. So we are supporting initiatives like the Partnership for Action on the Green Economy, the Global Alliance on the Circular Economy and Resource Efficiency. We're also actively involved in the ongoing negotiations on a globally legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution, for example. Because these frameworks also help countries to also then orient their national efforts and make sure we have the level playing field and other issues that everyone always talks about. In between, there is also the regional level. And we know from our own European experience how important that can be when you have countries that are more similar to each other working together. So we're also engaging at that level as well. For example, with circular economy alliances in Africa, in Latin America, and the Caribbean. Now, in response to your second question, this whole consideration is at the key of our Global Gateway strategy. What is, Global Gateway? Global Gateway is fundamentally a recognition that the world is currently going through and needs to go through, maybe with an even faster pace, big planetary transformations in some critical areas that will shape, that are shaping already the world of the future. The green transition, digital, connectivity, issues around health. So this is, and there are a couple of elements here which are very relevant for this discussion. First is the access to finance. Nothing happens without that. Now we know that the majority of countries around the world are middle-income countries. And they have a major challenge because very often to access finance on their own, they find this very difficult. It's very difficult for them. So what we do, for example, instruments like the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, the EFSD Plus, we aim to actually help them achieve access to capital, to private capital, at much more favorable conditions. The second thing is the involvement of the private sector, because these transitions cannot happen without the private sector. That's where the innovation, the technology lies. Again, the private sector needs access to finance. Of course, not just finance, we also need to work on things like ensuring there is a good enabling environment, regulatory environment, stable macroeconomic and political environment, but you do need finance as well. So here we are working very closely with the European financial institutions like the EIB and others to make sure, for example, we can de-risk investments in this sector. And this is really what Global Gateway is all about, and we see the very tangible results. So, for example, the switch to circular value chains project, we are looking at entire value chains. This is not about promoting single investments, but rather to ensure that we can have a transformation of these value chains through the instruments we have.
Thank you very much. That's really comprehensive and interesting. And of course, that means close collaboration with the private sector. I'll talk to you, Verle, now. You represent, of course, a company that has global value chains that operates from Europe, that has an expertise in materials management as well. What do you see as the critical investments that are needed in order to upscale circularity massively?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. It's a difficult job to represent the industry here, but at the same time, you know, I joined...
It's a friendly bunch, though.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So I joined Umicore 10 months ago, and one of the reasons I chose to join Umicore was because of their leadership in sustainability and action, so the actionability of that, but also since they have a proven business model and a successful business model in the circular economy. And when you think about circularity, I tend to think of this in 7 or 8 steps, depending on where you start, but somehow a product is being made, we all use it, and we maybe repair it, give it a second use, and then basically we should be disposing this because it reaches end of life, and it needs to be, you know, circulated backwards so that in the end the recycling can take place. And when you think of the materials that are critical right now, and what Umicore is doing within that to bring that down in the new type of products, which are the fuel cells or the batteries for electric vehicles, we're trying to work on technologies that basically reduce the amount of critical materials that we need to have in there, right? Which is truly, for example, solid-state batteries. Yeah? Another way of doing that is by substituting the metals, and then the last way is by recycling it. And over time, in the last 20 years, Umicore has been doing a lot of that recycling quite effectively. When you think about automotive catalysts, for example, we all know that we have, when you have a gasoline car, there is a catalyst inside. So that all gets, you know, recycled back to the original metals, which are rhodium and other, you know, precious metals. So the good thing about these metals and these minerals is that this can be done continuously. So when you think about, you know, what would I want from our policymakers or our industry to, and all of us to basically do to help accelerate the deployment of a circular economy, I'm thinking of this in 3 ways. One is for governments and for policymakers to somehow create, I would call this capability and demand. So you need funding to do the right investments in innovation, but you also need, you know, policies and frameworks that, like the Critical Raw Materials Act, that help us have some security of what is going to happen and how is demand for the recycled materials going to be created. Because if we have no offload, why would we do this, right? So customers have to be able to pay for the cost of doing the circular economy and basically the recycling itself. The second is for the industry, so ourselves, is to create some kind of an execution mode, because like you said, you know, we can't deploy it if we can't execute, right? So we need to create the environment in which we can truly invest in what is needed, but also way up front in the design phase, we need to spend research euros or dollars, wherever they come from, to design for circularity, which today is not always the case. And then lastly, I will also call on all of us, the society, in fact, to think of, well, how are we preparing the circular economy ourselves? When you think of, for us to do a recycling business, we need a continuous stream of materials to be recycled. We don't own them, right? We need to get them, we need to collect them somehow. And if you think of e-scrap, for example, all your phones, your PCs, your game consoles or whatever, if you look at the study that was made in 22, there was 22% of a 62 billion kilos of e-scrap that was being documented to be recycled in the right way. So that tells me that there's 78%, so about 50 billion kilos of e-scrap somewhere in the world that I would like to take portions of to recycle back to the precious metals it contains. But can you imagine that type of volume? So we need policy and enforcement to really help with creating that stream of, I won't call it waste, because they are input products for us, but in general terms, it's named as waste, right? So I think that's a critical component as well.
It's really interesting because, and tell me if it's an unfair reflection of what you just said, but what I take away from this is that there is a question about investment for sure. There's a massive question about policy enablement, but I didn't hear anything about technological barriers. All of that, what you're describing, is actually pretty feasible. You need to get the right incentives and things in place. And that's something, Hans, I wanted to go back to you with that one, because this is part of the rationale behind the scenarios that are actually not pipe dreams at all. It's just a question of what we call making the economics work, because it's a recognition of the fact that the current model is hardwired for and by linearity, and it supercharges it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important element, and it was mentioned by several speakers in the sessions before. We need to incentivize the circular economy and the low carbon economy, but I think we don't pay enough attention to disincentivizing the linear economy and the carbon economy. And that is more difficult. It requires more guts, I would say. And it is also, of course, where the pushback is. But if we do not disincentivize the linear model, it will not suffice to come up with all sorts of elements to incentivize a shift. It will not be strong enough. So addressing lock-ins and having a clear vision on what we should stop doing, in addition on what we should be doing more, and I know that is the intellectually pleasing curve of the change, because that's where politicians put their efforts, that's where policymakers design instruments, that's where businesses invest. It's all great, but this changing of the incentive structure is absolutely necessary. The same, by the way, in the governance model that was addressed as well. We are still in a model where in global conferences, we are happy if we can remove 4 brackets after 2 days of negotiations. And we are happy in the 28th COP that in the final text, we can finally mention the substance that is the main driver of climate change. I mean, those are critical elements of what we should leave behind. And so I do agree completely with all the good examples of incentivizing, but we need a lot more stronger reflection and also action on what we should be phasing out, what we should be stopping, and how to do that. And it's difficult work, but there is no other way.
I think they like that. If you come out with a single, they'll buy it.
It's usually first the flowers, then the pot, so...
Martin, from a policymaker perspective and hearing all these reflections, I think it's interesting that Hans says, it's about what we do, but what we stop doing as well. As a policymaker, and if you look at a set of actions, how do you make that sort of choice? And do you favor specific instruments, or would you go for a phasing out of others? Basically, the most relevant policy actions, or in that case, perhaps things to stop. How do you prioritize?
Well, the secret recipe for any good transformation is to work on all elements. If you neglect even one element, it will not work, or it will take much longer, or it will certainly be suboptimal. Now, of course, this is easier said than done. We have to keep in mind as well that these necessary transformations are also happening in parallel with many other transformations. And of course, society sees the sum total of all the transformations, and so we need to be also working horizontally across policy areas to actually exploit as much as possible synergies between policies, rather than just focusing vertically on one priority at a time. So for example, on issues of circularity, yes, we need, for example, to look at how products are designed. Certainly, that's a big part of it. And circularity it cannot be an afterthought. It has to be embedded in the design. But we need to go beyond that. We need to look at business models. We need to understand, this is why I mentioned earlier, when we work with our partner countries around the world, we look at entire value chains, so that we also help these countries make the most out of the resources, often very scarce and limited resources they do have. This is important as well, because ultimately, I think the biggest problem of all is the business model problem that we have inherited from the past. And then, of course, there's the issue of the regulatory framework. Now, the regulatory framework, of course, is difficult, but it's not just a series of do's and don'ts. A good regulatory framework, and this is, I think, is something where there's an increasing demand out there, rightly so, should also help have the necessary support structures. You know? In Europe, but in many other parts of the world, we live in an economy dominated, for example, by small and medium enterprises. They need support. And so it's not enough to enact legislation with the do's and don'ts. It's also important to have the necessary support structures. And unfortunately, what we've seen all too many cases is that the legislation is developed faster, much faster than the support structures can be built up. So that's something we also need to correct. Because otherwise we run the risk of running out of political capital when we're only halfway of the journey.
Well, thank you for that, because actually that brings me perfectly to the transition. I wanted to look at the political landscape and ask you, Minister Kitabi, those topics, given what we see coming and what we sense of the evolving political landscape, how hopeful are you for them to be maintained, reinforced? How do we need to act? What sort of data, what sort of narratives, how do you actually frame that to make it palatable to the voters and turn it into what it should be, actually, which is a product for society?
Well, on those hard times, I believe in science. And as I've already mentioned, I'm convinced that what the report put on the table is really a major issue to help us to highlight the opportunities of the transition. And in this regards, targeted action is a major level. Defining quantified science-based targets enhance predictability, generates a common investment focus, and can make markets shift. So we really don't have time enough to make other choices than what you put on your report. And as I mentioned, in those time of fake news, and I think that only science can help us. And I believe that all politicians say that they believe in science-based policies. But in my daily work, I have to confess that even science is not anymore enough recognized in our policy. So first of all, I'm convinced that we have to have much more targeted action, much more than the narrative, but very clear targeted action with showing what will be also the results. And I also believe, you mentioned it, I believe even in the context you mentioned, I'm convinced that regulatory instrument can trigger innovation and investment, potentially also for projects outside the EU. And in this context, I believe that the European sustainable regulation will have a substantial impact in the coming years on the eco-design of projects that are put on the European market. and I believe that they will be more circular and more sustainable.
And also address or help address questions around biodiversity loss, climate, and all the horizontal issues that we see. We're going to take a question from the floor, and I believe somebody has been handed a microphone representing Generation Climate Europe with a couple of questions for the panelists. So if I could please ask you to introduce yourself and clarify who the question is for.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor, and thank you for the panelists for this very interesting discussion. I am Paul from Generation Climate Europe, and I am leading the Circular Economy Working Group in that organization. We are the largest youth-led coalition related to climate in Europe, and we are representing more than 400 youth organizations throughout Europe, and we are based on the principle of intergenerational justice. We believe that all generations should be equally represented in the political arena, especially in the EU decision-making process. Not just at the receiving end of the information, but as active drivers of change. We already bear the cost of climate change, our generation, of the climate crisis, the different environmental crises, and yet we continue to be ignored in the EU decision-making process. So this is the reason I'm here and asking this question. Minister Khattabi, I would like to ask you the following question. As one of the priorities of the Belgian presidency is the implementation of the Circular Economy Action Plan, what specific measures will you take to ensure a meaningful youth representation on circular economy issues throughout your presidency? And my second question is for Mr. Deputy Director-General. In the last environmental European agency report, it states that the EU has a high reliance on critical raw material imports, which I quote from countries with suboptimal level of governance, weak enforcement of environmental law, and insufficient monitoring of the social impact of extraction. So what action will be taken by your DG to ensure that civil society is represented to have a better law enforcement on the environment and to decrease pressure on resource extraction? Thank you.
Minister Khattabi, do you want to go first?
Yeah, quickly. Thank you for your question. I'm very much aware of the fact that the decision we take or the decision that we don't take today will be decisive for the next generation, for young people tomorrow. And therefore, I consider you and your generation as one of the highest priority stakeholders, and I see you from this intergenerational perspective at the center of the discussion on a just transition. And this is why I gave you a clear voice during the European Conference for Just Transition, organized by us as Belgian Presidency, and where the president of the European Youth Forum was invited at the high-level roundtable discussion. She shared together with commissioners, member state delegates, and other stakeholders the view of the European Youth Organization on priorities for just transition. Other youth organizations like Youth and Environment and your own organization, Generation Climate Europe, were also present during the Just Transition Conference to share valuable convictions, priorities, and ideas. And at the global event during UNEA 6, I was in close contact with European youth delegation, and as European presidency, one of our key demands was a strong paragraph on youth in the ministerial declaration, which was written by yourself. So we put it on the table as your contribution in the debate.
Thank you, Minister. Martin?
Yes, thank you for your question. I mean, we are all, of course, fully aware that critical raw materials are going to be one of the most important aspects of all this discussion. So, first of all, one of the things which the EU has been doing, the Commission has been doing, is to make sure there is a robust legal framework on this aspect. So there's the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, which looks at ensuring the highest possible standards in terms of environmental and societal standards. We're also looking at a number of other areas. There are proposals, a number of areas which are linked to this aspect. The conflict minerals regulation, for example, the regulation on batteries, proposals for a directive on corporate sustainable due diligence, the regulation on forced labor. All this is very relevant to this discussion. Secondly, with a number of countries which are very much involved in this, we are pursuing already strategic partnerships and developing strategic partnerships with these countries to really help them, support them to really promote strong environmental, social and governance criteria. This has to be part of an intense dialogue with these countries, and when I say countries, not just with their governments, but with their societies, including, of course, civil society, and building together a roadmap of concrete actions with support. Thirdly, of course, the working directly with civil society, because civil society, one of its main roles is to hold us all accountable. And this is a very important role, and we support that role directly. So we support, for example, the Extractives Industries Transparency Initiative. We also support the European Partnership for Responsible Minerals. In these and other initiatives, civil society is very much involved. One final word, however, on this, because this is something I think which needs also a global action. We also need to make sure that countries that do the right thing, that engage in implementation, enforcement, are not then penalized because, for example, other countries are able to subsidize their production or somehow disrupt the level playing field. This needs a global solution because otherwise nobody will want to move first. So we need to create a world where the first movers are not punished but rewarded. Otherwise, everyone will wait for someone else to take the first step. And I think on this, there is a big need for a very, very strong, robust global discussion.
Thanks very much. And with that future outward-looking vision in mind and considering the youth, I'll ask you all for a 1 or 2 sentences comment just to close to make sure that everybody leaves with something concrete that they can aspire to. Verle, I'll let you start. No pressure.
Okay. So I think we heard all about policy and what we can do and what they will do, and I'm sure as we have been making progress, we will continue to make progress. What I'd like you all to think about is, imagine what you can do. Dream big about what you can do yourself as well to help facilitate this, and think about that. There's a lot that you can do in your own merit, and don't wait for the big things to happen, but also think small.
Thank you. Hans.
Okay, 1, focus on urgency and not on pushing pause buttons. Earth systems do not have pause buttons. Secondly, focus on the human dimension and the social dimension, because that's where you can mobilize and get support from people. Third, mobilize the financial system and not just thinking in taxes. There is more than enough money on this planet to deal with these issues. And 4, stop the unsustainable.
Thanks very much. Minister Kitabi.
Yeah, maybe never forget that the choices we made in the way of a circular economy are not value-free. It is all about our vision of society at all policies level.
Thank you. Martin, you have the final word.
Well, implementation will be key. I will say that again. And we need, I think, to make an even more determined effort on implementation. Otherwise, there is a big risk that the excellent work we have done on the legislative, regulatory front will not deliver, or might actually be rolled back. So this is really important. We have the instruments. It's not a question of new instruments, but we need to work across policy areas. And rather than work in individual silos, we need to make this work for people. This will be key.
So in a way, it also means that the easy bit has been done. We've legislated the frameworks, we've put nice words in place, and now it's down to the business policy society interface to come together and find a way forward to the how.
And seize the opportunities, because this is a forward-looking agenda.
Well, that's all we have time for. I think that was great. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll hand it over back to Pep now. If he's around, are you here? Thank you.
Greg.
I'll let you.
But how about another round of applause for Joss and the whole panel? Fantastic.
Thanks, Hans. Pleasure. Minister,
If you are watching us online, you're probably going to be the first to tune out. So let me remind you, tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. That's 9 a.m. Central European time. And if you're in a different time zone, do the math. It's not so tough. For everybody else, dinner will be served from 6:30 until 8 down in the expo where we had lunch. We'll be having dinner at 6:30, but don't wait till 6:30 to get there. I'll be there at 6:15 to run a little networking activity to help everybody work and get along better, and I promise a couple laughs as well. Tomorrow's going to be a fantastic day too. I personally am looking forward to that opening panel, ensuring a peaceful transition, which will include two sort of separate discussions, both one by Olivia Lazar, the research fellow from Carnegie Europe. Honestly, I want to hear both of those panels, but as someone who's been moderating panels all day, I want to see her keep the talkers down to just 2 10-minute panels. I don't think it's possible. We will be starting, like I told the online folks, tomorrow at 9 sharp. We open the doors to the square at 8 o'clock, and if you get here at 7:30, you can just sit in the rain on the stairs. That's a possibility too. This has been day one. I'll see you at 6:15 or tomorrow morning. Thank you.